Are we coming up? Is that it? Are we here? Nothing yet. 3, 2, 1.
Did you hit it again? What else would you touch?
Hello. Hello. Okay, there we go. We're up.
Thank you.
Are you good, Linda?
We'll see.
City Manager, we're good? We'll call the meeting to order of Thursday, April 26th of the Capitola City Council. May I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Bertrand.
Here.
Councilmember Peterson.
Here.
Councilmember Bottorff.
Here.
Mayor Termini.
Here. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first order of business tonight was a presentation to Stephanie Tedder, who's a longtime member of the museum board. She was unable to attend tonight, but she sent us a message that the Capitola Museum is a wonderful place with an amazing curator and terrific volunteers, including council members Harlan and Peterson. I have loved being a member of the museum board. I look forward to continuing as a volunteer. Thank you so much for this recognition. And Stephanie, if you're listening, former Mayor Harlan, Councilmember Harlan, was not able to attend tonight's meeting. She's not feeling well, but she wanted me to extend her thanks to you because she loves you and appreciates the work. So thank you, Stephanie Tedder. And with the introduction of our new Community Development Director, I'll turn this over to our City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, transitions like this are always bittersweet times. Before I welcome Katie, I think I want to say a few words about Rich, our outgoing Community Development Director. For those of you who don't know, Rich came to us more than 5 years ago from down south in San Diego. And at that time, the Community Development Department was had a lot of transition for the previous decade. There'd been some good community development directors and maybe some mediocre ones who moved on to other things like city manager. That would be me, for those of you who don't know. But regardless, we had not had the tenure and the stability in the department for a long time. And when Rich stepped in, that was one of the things that we talked about, was whether he was willing to give us 4 or 5 years, because I thought the department really needed it. And he stepped into the department, and I use the word department pretty loosely in this context because, frankly, at that point, the department consisted of Rich and his desk. There was no senior planner. There was no associate planner. So Rich really built this department up to what it is today and, frankly, got a lot done in the 5 years he was here. He was helped get the general plan done, and him and Katie were able to get the zoning ordinance done, which were 2 huge boxes that were checked off the to-do list. So I want to thank Rich for his service to the city and acknowledge him for the great work that he's done, because I've learned a lot from him and it's been a real pleasure working with him.
And in response, I would like to take a moment and thank Mr. Mayor, the City Council, the City Manager. It's been a true honor and a privilege to serve as your Community Development Director the last 5 years. I've told many of you it's the best job I've ever had and the most difficult one that I'll probably ever leave. It's not because I don't love the community, because I've grown to love it. I've loved my job. It's just a decision that we've made for our family. But it's going to be difficult to leave this great community. It's been a real pleasure to live here and work here. I think the community is very fortunate to have this City Council, the Planning Commission, that really invests its time to care about the community, that serve its community, not because they have any personal interests, but they really truly want what's best for the residents that they serve. And likewise, the city manager has been a real joy to work for. I've learned a tremendous amount from him. He's a great leader. I think his staff, we all enjoy working for him. And, you know, sometimes I think government is at its most effective when you don't hear a lot about it because they're doing well. And I think that's the case here, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. And I'm excited for Katie. I think she's going to do a great job being my successor, take the department to the next level. That's one of the real joys that I have, is that I get to leave and see Katie move up and advance in her career. So congratulations to her as well, and thank you once again.
And if I'm not mistaken, you hired Katie.
I did.
Well done.
And so the last thing before Rich goes, I do want to present him with something that he can use in his new office in Coronado to remind him of Capitola. And because the city hall there is actually across the street from the beach, if he ever wants to go for a swim at lunch, you can do double duty, just in case you need anything to help float. So here, from us to you, I'm sure you'll cherish it and love it.
Now, back to the original proposal here. Somebody want to introduce our new community development director?
So with that, I'm pivoting to the happy part. This is really a pleasure for me. In all my tenure as city manager, I've never had the opportunity to promote someone internally, and Katie has offered us the first opportunity to do that. Sorry.
The second opportunity
An
to
opportunity to do that, as well as our city clerk as well. Katie, for those of you who follow the city, I think everyone knows what wonderful things she's done over the last 4 or 5 years here in the city. Getting that zoning code done was no small feat. You sat through the meetings. But I think it's also really important to understand that she didn't just show up here brand new out of school. Katie went to school at the University of Vermont, got a bachelor's in environmental science, and then went and had a 17-year career working for local governments, working in the field. Before coming here, she worked for Park City, where she got a number of really important projects done, including their general plan. She wrote an area plan for the redevelopment area and was able to process permits for their city council to consider for a significant hotel in their Old Town area. So on top of the accomplishments and the great thing that Katie has already done here in Capitola, she came with a pedigree of experience that was enviable for any planner. So I am really happy and proud to announce Katie as our new community development director. I'm really looking forward to working with her and having her as a member of my management team. And with that, welcome and thank you, Katie.
Thank you. So I'd just like to say that I've had, during my 5 years here so far, I've been learning from the best, and I really appreciate all my time learning under Rich and Jamie as well. But I look forward to carrying the baton forward and getting our LCP adopted by the Coastal Commission, hopefully in the next year or two. And it's been a pleasure and an honor getting to know the City Council and our Planning Commission, full of dedicated members to this, to our community. And I really look forward to continue serving the Capitola and being given this opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. And I think, is your family here?
My family is here.
Why don't you bring them up?
Okay. Ooh. My daughters Lucy and Lily are here. My niece Ivory, my sister Maura, all here this evening. So. This is my family. And
Nice to see you.
We love being part of this community.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam City Clerk, are there any additions to the agenda?
None.
Oh, please forgive me.
We have some closed session before that.
Very good. And Mr. City Attorney, report on closed session, please.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor Tremeni, members of the City Council. Items discussed this evening in closed session were labor negotiations involving all bargaining groups. Secondly, there were 2 items of considering initiation of litigation that were discussed, and the council received reports from city staff and the city attorney's office and gave direction. There was no reportable action.
Thank you. This is the time for public comments on items that are not on this evening's agenda. So if you're here to speak on an item on the agenda, this is not the time to speak. If you'd like to speak to us on a general item of interest, please step forward. Hi, Molly. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Termini, council members. My name is Molly Ording, and I'm here tonight to bring your attention to 2 matters that both affect our Capitola neighbors and all of us residents and visitors to Capitola. The first issue is just to remind us all of your commitment to bring back in May the discussion of possible solutions to the excessive amount of cut-through traffic and speeding that the residents of Topaz continue to experience. What makes this situation even more onerous and dangerous now is as summer approaches, the Camp Capitola kids using Topaz to walk through on their way to Jade Street after the junior guards. As you know, Topaz has no sidewalks and cars are parked on both sides of the street. With so many cars using Topaz to avoid traffic in adjacent streets and many of them speeding, this indeed is a very dangerous situation for these Camp Capitola kids. I hope you'll really commit to bringing some well-informed changes to reduce the effects of this ongoing and dangerous situation to Topaz and for all in the Jade Street neighborhood. The second issue is the tired, old, seasonal assault on our village by totally inconsiderate groups of motorcyclists who roar down and out of our village access streets on Cliff and Monterey and Wharf, and speeds and noise levels that are totally unacceptable. This past weekend, which was an otherwise beautiful one, the situation was particularly onerous, as now their bikes are bigger, louder, and they're often accompanied by blaring music. They roar in, and when they leave, they gather in groups at the stop signs below the grades, holding up traffic behind them, and then hit it several abreast, creating the worst noise pollution I have ever heard. Kids hold their ears, people shout at them to go home. It is a total auditory and behavioral assault that is once more absolutely unacceptable to so many who have to be subjected to this bullish, dangerous, and insanely loud behavior from a fast-moving bunch of loud motorcycles. We've discussed this often in the past, and every year the problem worsens as their bikes become bigger and louder. The police department, at some urging by many citizens, has tried some solutions which have partially worked. Parking ghost cars at the bottom of the hills, notifying bikers that Capitola has an excessive noise ordinance, and zero tolerance. This year, perhaps in addition to these actions, we could look at posting those solar speed signs, such as the one that's on Park Avenue, along these exit streets. After all, there is a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit throughout our village. I urge you to use your considerable influence upon our PD to be proactive and aggressive in doing what they can to deter and stop this horrid and dangerous behavior. We are a community who commits in so many ways to combat pollution. Let's add noise pollution on that list of shared community priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Molly. And for those of you who don't know Molly, I believe you're the chair of our Parking and Traffic Commission. Thank you. Anyone else like to address the council? Seeing none? Treasurer comment. Oh, come on up. Come on. We're not going anywhere.
Hi, my name's Dana Ingersoll. I represent a number of residents that are on Topaz Street. We're here just to remind you that we're there and we're still being assaulted by, 1,300 cars a day. So we also hope that there'll be some good news in May of possibilities towards some movement. We've been encouraged by the attention you all have given to the issue. I know it's been really difficult for everybody, but we just want you to know that we're here waiting, and that there are also, as well as Camp Capitola, so many more people that use that pedestrian walkway kind of starting now, right, through October and our heavy season, all the people cutting through, walking, and unaware of what they're walking through. So please keep us at the top of the
Thank you.
list. Thank you.
We got the card system this time. Anyone else like to address the council on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, Mr. Treasurer, what do you have to say to us?
Nothing this time. Thank you, Mayor.
Staff?
None at this time.
We'll move on to council comments. Councilmember Bertrand, what do you have to say?
Yeah, just like to recognize that we have several people from the SoCal Unified School District here, and we have the superintendent, the principal of New Brighton, and we have one of our distinguished, you are the chair, I believe, of the Board of Trustees. Yes, so I'd like to report that I had the opportunity last Wednesday to appear before the SoCal Unified School District meeting, and I was well received, and I was there to comment on the Safe Route to Schools program. And I'd like to say that, as reported, they've been working with our city very well. It seems like there's good cooperation with Steve Jesberg that was brought out several times, and there are going to be other things that move forward, and I think between our respective city manager and superintendent, those things hopefully will work out. So I appreciate that meeting. The other thing, I just came back from Four Seas meeting down in San Luis Obispo, and the whole issue there was working on tools that can be used by cities in terms of planning for the issues that have to do with like sea level rise, climate issues related to that. So I look forward to meeting with Katie on that and reporting out, and also our council on the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. Kristen?
Nothing tonight.
Ed? I have nothing. Well, I have a few things. Take the opportunity. Number one, there's a tax initiative being distributed right now, just for everyone's information. It is to make all tax measures a 2/3 vote, and it is being put forward by the soda companies because they're very concerned about soda taxes being passed, and as a result of the places where they pass sugary drink taxes, people drink fewer sugary drinks. This is important to them. That's why they've given $500,000 to try and pass this particular initiative. Be careful what you sign. We will have future proclamations from the Capitola Safety Foundation, which is holding its car show in another month in our village, sort of kick off the summer. They are major contributors to Junior Guards, Operation Surf, and now our library, and they'll be presenting the traditional giant check to each of these organizations in the future. And as one more comment, parked cars on Crystal, we received notice that there are a lot of abandoned cars that seem to be spending an awful lot of their spare time on Crystal, and probably the rest of the jewel box as well, because it's out of sight, out of mind. And maybe we can get our PD or the Highway Patrol down there to put those very, very magic red tags on there that say that you will be towed in a certain amount of time. There's precious few parking spaces in the jewel box to begin with, and we don't need abandoned cars there. And finally, due to a public records request, there were a bunch of emails released from the RTC this week, and I was prominently mentioned in a couple of them. And I just have a message for the executive director of the RTC, Mr. Dondero, that believe me, when I speak about the safety of our trestle, I'm not making idle political hay. I'm concerned with the life and safety of our community. So I'll just leave it at that. Let's move on to the consent agenda. It's an item that we take multiple items at one time. Is the fellow from Beacon still here? Or do you think?
I don't think so.
Okay. Then this is the consent agenda. Any item can be pulled by a member of staff or the council or the community council. Any items that we want to be pulled? Anyone from the community? Then I'll entertain a motion.
Move the agenda.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Moving right along. We'll go on to general government and public hearings. Let me remind you, we're using our large format public comment system. Again, it worked very well in the jewel box discussion. There were green, yellow, and red cards for you to fill out in the back of the room, and the green cards will go first, and they get to speak for a minute. The yellow cards will come next. They'll get to speak for 2 minutes. The red cards come last, and they will speak for 3 minutes. So I would like to start with the staff report on our first general government meeting, which is food cupboard and free little libraries. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, City Council. By way of background, this item came before the council at the request of the mayor, and its initiation was through a citizen complaint to both the Community Development Department and the Police Department regarding a free food cupboard or pantry located at 1973 42nd Avenue. The citizens voiced concerns that the food pantry was attracting outsiders to the neighborhood, and they had suspicions that he may be behind recent vehicle break-ins and other acts of vandalism in the community. We have not received any complaints regarding the little library that's located at the same property. So following the complaint, staff did a site inspection. We did find that there was a food cupboard in the front yard. This particular property is in a residential multifamily zoned area. The food cupboard contained canned goods, fruit, bread, cottage cheese, and repackaged and unlabeled food when we visited it. Following the inspection, staff requested the property owner remove the food cupboards due to safety and zoning issues, and the owner did agree and complied and removed the food pantry. Subsequently, staff received another complaint from a citizen regarding that there was a new food box that's pictured up here that had been replaced for the more formal food pantry. Again, staff contacted the owner, requested that she remove it, and again, she complied. I would like to point out that at no time did staff initiate or issue any code enforcement violations or citations. It's been a voluntary compliance situation. So there's two issues the council should keep in mind when they consider whether or not we want to start allowing free food cupboards or pantries. The first being public health and safety, and then second, zoning issues. And I'll go through those in a little more detail. So in terms of public health and safety, food preparation and distribution is regulated by the County Department of Environmental Health. We've reached out to them to get some of their views on food cupboards and pantries, and they outlined a number of concerns to us. Principal amongst those is that there would be a lack of control over any food that's placed in these cupboards. There's no approved food sources. There's a potential for mishandling of foods and possibly potentially hazardous foods. Lack of safety for foods prepared in unspecified and unregulated home kitchens. The potential for contamination from vermin, insects, and then heat and cold and the other elements that might affect the food in the boxes. And then a lack of adequate management for food storage. Staff at DEH recommended that people that are interested in pursuing these pantries instead work with existing nonprofits such as Second Harvest Food Bank, or potentially partnering with other organizations to establish safe food donation distribution services in appropriately zoned areas of the city. In terms of zoning issues, food cupboards are not a listed use type in the zoning code. As you're all aware from going through our zoning code, zoning ordinances are constructed in a permissive style where we describe what you can do with a property. So if a use is unlisted, generally it is not an allowed use. The closest types of listed use we have in our zoning code would be food preparation and distribution. These, as you might imagine, are not compatible in residential zones. They're often associated with nuisance impacts like increased foot and vehicle traffic, parking, and potentially odors. In addition to that, accessory structures are not allowed in front yards in the residential zoning district, with some exceptions, things like trestles, trellises, little fountains, but we don't allow larger accessory structures, particularly those that have a use component to them. And then finally, operating a business from a residence generally requires a home occupation permit. A free food cupboard would not qualify under our current ordinance because it does not allow outdoor storage of any goods. It limits client contacts to 1 at a time or 3 per day, and deliveries to a home occupation would be limited between 8 and 8, Monday through Saturday. Another use that's somewhat similar that we've talked about is a garage sale, where you do have people that are coming into a residential neighborhood, and the code for a long time has limited those types of activities to 3 times a year, as opposed to a food cupboard that's open 24/7, 365. The other issue is the little library. So there's a lot of these free little libraries, not only in Capitola, Santa Cruz, but I think they're pretty popular everywhere you go across the country. We're aware of several that are operating in Capitola. Similar to food pantries, they're not a listed use type in the zoning code, and technically they're also an accessory structure that would not be allowed in the front yard. The distinction, however, is little libraries do not present any real health and safety issues and don't seem to really attract any foot or vehicle traffic from outside the area. It seems to be something that's used by the neighbors to exchange books, and it's really a low impact type of use. In addition to that, staff has never received any complaints about little libraries in town. So based on that, staff's recommendations to the council would be that we continue to prohibit unsupervised food cupboards in residential zones. If there is a desire to use those food cupboards, our recommendation would be to develop standards for them to be in commercial zones where they don't impact residents. Free little libraries, we have less concerns. In fact, we would recommend the staff or the City Council direct staff to add allowances and standards for free little libraries during a future zoning code amendment, possibly after we return to you with modifications from the Coastal Commission for our LCP. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Are there any questions of staff? Yes, Jacques.
You mentioned working with Second Harvest. Could that mean like there could be a barrel there like there are around the city and many different businesses, et cetera?
Well, Second Harvest has, welcomed anyone that would like to work with them. I think they're open to different ideas. I think they do operate a little differently. It's, they're not a place that they distribute their food differently.
Right.
But somebody that's interested in helping the needy can certainly work with them.
Could the little food pantry be behind the front fence, for instance, and the owner of the house would let people in and out, or have some sort of other arrangement? So basically, it's hidden from the street. It's under the control of the owner of the property.
Under the current code, they could not. That would only resolve the issue of an accessory structure in the front yard. Certainly, if the council is interested, and we can craft an ordinance that would allow these types of uses. My suspicion, though, is that you'll have concerns from neighbors that live next to it, that with the increased foot traffic and some of the nuisance impacts that those might bring with them.
Okay, so as it stands now, it's not permitted, but there could be some further motion, maybe going through the city planning to come up with an alternate solution.
Staff could certainly work with the city attorney to craft an ordinance that would be legally defensible, that would allow these types of uses if that's the council's desire.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to start with Bonnie Linden, longtime resident, who lives at 1973 42nd Avenue. I've offered her the opportunity, since it is her property and she brought this issue to light, to give her 5 minutes to do a PowerPoint presentation and present her views. Come on up, Bonnie. And thank you. That's an excellent question, and for that, there it is. Carry on. You're on.
Spacebar.
I'm Bonnie Linden, Director of Time Bank Santa Cruz, a network to share skills and talents using time as currency. The Time Bank has been creating social capital throughout the county for 6 years. The Time Bank builds community cupboards and offers them to individuals to host in their own neighborhoods. Community cupboards are also called little free pantries and blessing boxes, and they exist throughout the country. They are an American tradition. We take care of each other. I also, as you know, have a little library and poetry box at my curb. We want the city to support all sharing economy practices that foster interdependence. Serving the community by, so it's not advancing, is it?
Hit the space bar.
Space bar. There we go.
Serving the community by sharing food at the edges of one's property is an ancient tradition. Who is the sojourner in modern times? Who are the poor? The encounters that I've had at my curb, small talk, garden tips, confiding about our lives, this is the very stuff of civic engagement. Because relationships of trust emerge, a neighborhood becomes resilient when people know and trust each other. Resilience, the capacity to recover readily from adversity. A cupboard builds resilience. Neighbors helping neighbors, a public display of civic virtue, a stronger safety net, access to a largely untapped local resource, which is people's willingness to help each other. We may face serious challenges in future, a bad earthquake, another economic downturn. We prepare by creating as much resilience as possible. California's Global Warming Act cites getting wasted food to the hungry as a solution. 40% of American food ends up in the landfill, where it creates methane, the very worst greenhouse gas emissions. We do have wonderful local food programs, but hunger is growing, particularly among students. Cupboards fill a niche that Second Harvest and Gray Bears don't address. A neighbor girl wrote this: I'm a foster youth, and having access to extra food gave me peace of mind. I loved our cupboard. I hope we get it back. This young woman has already faced significant challenges, and she's not cynical. She believes we're all in this together. Let's not betray her trust. The cupboard has lots of support. 260 people signed the online petition. 47 of my immediate near neighbors want it back. Let's put the cupboard back and monitor it for 3 months. We can observe food safety guidelines if that's your primary concern. What exactly is this cherished neighborhood character that your zoning law is trying to preserve at the corner of 42nd and Claire's? Is it really, what it's really about is who has the power to define how we live. Your staff told me that I was only entitled to reside on my property. Any other activity was illegal. If we're prohibited from using little libraries and community cupboards, we no longer have the First Amendment right of freedom to assemble. To me, this is chilling and repressive. It's Capitola at its most dystopian. It's directly counter to what I'm working to create. A living culture of neighbors who share public space, who know and care about each other. I want you to weigh the benefits and disadvantages of the cupboard on the scale of social and economic justice and make a moral choice. I'm already doing a lot of resilience building, as I think you know, and butting heads with bean counters is not part of my action plan. So I think that this is your province. It's your decision to make. It's your problem to solve with your staff. If you want to advocate for the cupboard, let's get on the same page and find some concrete ways to proceed. I love collaborating with trusted community partners.
Thank you, Bonnie. I'd now like to call up any of the green card holders. Anyone with a green card, please come up. You don't have to sign in. You can just drop your filled out green card in the box and you get your minute. Any green carders? Welcome.
Hi, my name's Asia Neiman, and I'm a Santa Cruz native. And I'm also a Save Surf managerial. I have a certificate in hygiene and safety. And I just want to tell you, we all know this is a very expensive place to live, and this is a very nice way for the community to come together and help one another. Not everybody wants to go and show up to, or even can show up to, some of the food banks because they might be working. And this provides another way that people can exchange maybe things that they would just throw out. So I think it's a really good thing. I also strongly believe that the boxes are pretty cute. I mean, in design, they're cute, and I would like to see Capitola welcome more of these, as well as the book exchange. I think that promoting reading and feeding the hungry is something that's very beneficial to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Welcome. Yes,
Welcome.
That's the spot. Just drop it right in.
Is that where it goes?
Yep. Perfect.
Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, I'm Eve Roberson, and I live in Live Oak, which is your nearest neighbor. And I do believe that Time Bank's little community cupboard's popularity with so many people in this neighborhood is evidence of a very real need. As a volunteer with Time Bank, I have donated food items to this program, as I believe is a valuable benefit to the families in this neighborhood. Many visitors walk or arrive on bikes. It's hard to believe that too many people would actually spend time and money to drive in from other areas to pick up individual items from this little community cupboard, as it varies from day to day. Time Bank is a unique organization, and it provides several other programs that help local folks as well. For instance, I live in a senior community here, and many of us have benefited from its Elder Hands program, which offers practical help with needs of the time bank by the time bank members and volunteers, such as house cleaning for a senior, shopping, transportation to medical appointments, and minor home chairs.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, and I do hope that for all these reasons and more, in recognition of time banks fulfilling a very real need for some folks in this Capitola neighborhood, I urge you to restore the time bank.
Thank you.
Community covered. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a green card? Come on up.
I have copies if anybody wants to read anything that I said.
You can leave it with the treasurer.
Would
And
like to have them? Thank you.
yes, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Kristen MacDonald, and I'm a Time Bank member. So I'm here in support of the Time Bank, and I want to say that in the last 6 months or so that I've been involved and I've been donating food to the Time Bank, I've met many individuals from the neighborhood who are there with great thanks and great gratitude for the food that the group has been providing. I've never seen cars driving in and taking food. It's always been people walking in, or as Eve said, on their bicycles. So to me, it's always seemed like a very local community situation. There's a lot of apartments in that area, and there's a lot of people there who live there who, frankly, I'm betting are not well off. Let's put it that way. I mean, I think they're getting by like a lot of us are. Anyway, there's also some precedents for this in Capitola. I will tell you quickly. I'm sorry. 30 seconds more?
Good, quickly.
Okay, Capitola was involved in a satellite shelter program, and Capitola's church, St. Joseph's, was involved in that. I was a member of that team. We used to bring food from our houses and feed homeless people there at night. They'd sleep at the church and go home in the morning. So this went on for a number of years. So there is precedence. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with a green card? Okay, yellow card holders. Anyone with a yellow card? Seeing none, we'll move on to the red cards. Any red card holders? Come on up. Welcome.
Hello, Mr. Mayor
Hello.
and council members. My name is Helen Bryce, and I am a member of the Time Bank, and I am here to express my support for the community cupboard and to ask you to restore it. I'm sure that various different ways of approaching the cupboard could be considered, and I don't have a lot to say, just that I support the cupboard. I think it's really important for the community. I agree that it creates community resilience, and that it is used primarily by people in the neighborhood. As you know, rents are going up like crazy, in particular in Capitola. I think there are people who live in the neighborhood who are just barely getting by and who benefit from the use of the community cupboard. And I also think it's a very good way for people to show each other that we care about each other and to help each other directly. I hate to use this phrase, but I do think it's kind of nanny state to be saying, that there are these regulations that prohibit people from sharing food. It's not a business. It's a way for people to share with each other. And that, to me, is literally at the heart of the matter. And I would just like to, again, encourage you to restore the community cupboard. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, council members. I'm Paula Bradley. I live at 1841 44th Avenue. And I'm here tonight because I want to express my objection to the recent code enforcement action at 1973 42nd Avenue, which is around the corner from my house. The council report makes it abundantly clear that the city is treating this as an urgent public health problem and major nuisance, and has used the broadest interpretation of the ordinance to try to make them fit to this tiny food cabinet. A complaint that the food cabinet attracts crime to the area and homeless people to congregate is unfounded and ridiculous. We drive by Bonnie's house several times a day, my husband numerous times a day, and late at night and early in the morning. We've never seen anyone other than, for example, a mother and a child looking in either the library box or the food cabinet. Bonnie's free food cabinet provided a positive example to everyone of one neighbor's thoughtful act of kindness to help others. The little free food cabinet gave me a reason to smile in contrast to the daily stream of bad news in the world. What I'd like to see is the city focus resources on some of the real issues in the neighborhood instead of this tiny food cabinet and threaten the owner with violations and fines. For example, there's a known drug house in our neighborhood, so I'm also concerned about crime. I pretty much witness it every day and know that it's going on. It attracts drug addicts and thieves to the neighborhood. I see it all the time. They shoot up in the private parking lots in the area. I found syringes on the ground, and I know other people that have also. So I think this is an example of a real issue that really warrants resources. And additionally, last year I filed a real code enforcement complaint about 7 inoperable and dismantled vehicles in the vacant lot next to my house. It took 9 months, including phone calls to the city every 3 or 4 weeks, to actually get something done about it. Very frustrating. So additionally, I'd like to speak about the prohibiting the little libraries. Again, I couldn't believe that the city was considering this, and I implore the city, do not waste any more city resources to consider changing the zoning code to prohibit these cute little libraries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Peter, you can sit where you are and comment. Oh, yes, you are the treasurer, and we're going to let you keep your seat.
Is he speaking as the treasurer or as the...
So I'm not speaking as a treasurer. I'm just speaking as an interested person. I
thought you were going to bring up something about the city money. So go right ahead. Go to the podium, because it seems like at least the city manager is more comfortable with that formality.
What card color do you have?
Let's say it's red.
Okay.
So I just wanted to bring up something that Rich alluded to, but no one else really spoke of, and I think it's clear that it was incumbent upon staff to recommend against this from a health and safety standpoint, and the fact that we don't have any provisions for it, and it is an additional building and whatnot. But he also gave you an out, which is to send it back to staff. And as much as I hate to spend the money on staff time and legal fees, this is something that I think maybe with a little bit of effort, a zoning code change might be able to help out, so that we don't put ourselves, i.e. the city, at risk due to health and safety concerns. Perhaps just a small amendment to the zoning code could make these people happy.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll bring this back to the council, and we'll start with Ed.
Okay.
Thought I'd surprise you.
Sure. This is an interesting topic. We all probably realize, I don't think anybody up here feels like they don't want to do something to help our neighbor. I mean, that's kind of one of the premises we all exist on. One of the words that struck me when the presentation was being made was the word trust. Ms. Linden was trying to reference that this builds trust in the neighborhood. And from my perspective up here, we're entrusted with enforcing the rules of the city of Capitola. And the rules of the city of Capitola say that the zoning is inappropriate for this location. And the other thing that comes into play here is that this city is a pretty forgiving city, as I want to perceive. And we are a complaint-driven city. And the reason that this is before us is that You know, the little libraries have been in existence for years. We have not one complaint. All of a sudden, this food bank comes in to play, and we get a lot of complaints. So here's the indicator. The indicator is that our job, or at least I perceive my job, is to enforce the ordinances as much as possible that the city has. And there's an ordinance that prohibits this type of operation in the community. And when community members feel unsafe in their neighborhood for whatever reason, you know, we just went over a big issue with traffic, people concerned about cars speeding through their neighborhoods. You know, any number of issues come before us, and our job is to protect the members of this city that live here by enforcing the ordinances that exist. And like I said, what came before us now is that we have a complaint about this food. You know, on so many levels, it may be doing a good service for people that need the food, but I have concerns about the health and safety of the people that consuming the food, the quality of the food. This is something that none of us, our staff doesn't have. We don't have the ability to regulate this. So for that reason, you know, I find this as something I can't support. I have to support staff recommendation that the cupboard it's taken down. It's not to go back up. It's not a good use in the neighborhood. I mean, we establish zoning ordinances to make things fit in neighborhoods. We don't put certain kind of commercial outlets in residential neighborhoods. We try for the most part to protect the integrity of our residential neighborhoods. With regard to what I'd like to see is that, you know, I looked around, you know, when this came up, I went and I met with Bonnie. I looked at the cupboard, I looked at the library. I started noticing there's a lot more of these libraries throughout town. And even though the concept of them is good, some of the structures are actually quite large. And sometimes we have people that want to put trellises in their front yards, and we tell them they can't do that. So I am concerned about the direction what we do. I think part of the staff recommendation, I don't know if that was on there, was the direction of the library. Yeah, I think we need to, I definitely feel that we need to direct staff to add some allowances and standards for the libraries, because I don't think that anybody can build anything in their front yard, because, you know, right now we're building a library which was going to start out at 8,000 square feet. Now it's 12,000 square feet. So I don't want a little library to become like, you know, a 2-bedroom library in someone's front yard. So I would like to see at least part 2. And with regard to part 1 with the cupboards, I'm just going to support staff recommendation. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to support staff recommendation to prohibit unsupervised food cupboards and direct staff to the allowances on the libraries.
I'm hearing crickets. That motion is dying for lack of a second, but okay. There'll be time for another motion.
Okay.
Kristen.
This is one of those kind of complex and complicated issues for me. I agree with everything that's been said about the benefits of the time bank and the food pantry, and I'm, you know, not ashamed to say that there have been times in my adult life when I was one of those people that needed those resources for food to get through the week to a next payday. I agree that there's benefits. I have always been on the side of social justice and food justice and civic engagement, and I am 100% in agreement that you are building resilience and community character. That being said, this isn't the first time that I've had to make a decision about something that I was in support of, while also having to walk the line of understanding the realities of zoning codes and just working in government. I think that's part of the learning curve of being a council member for me personally. I agree. I'm not sure that any increases in crime or traffic are because of your pantry. I don't necessarily buy that as a concern. The concerns that I do very strongly feel are in regard to food distribution and food safety, and not necessarily because I think that anyone who is providing food has malintent or is providing poor food. I have just as much concern that someone who doesn't want this cupboard to be in existence would take the opportunity to sabotage it and then blame it on the time bank. I am just as concerned for that reality. I understand and have heard the sense of community and helping each other and in being resilient, and I encourage that to continue regardless of what happens this evening. And in moving forward, that perhaps there's a way to do some kind of online coordination or person-to-person matching of people who have excess food with people who are in need of food in another way other than the pantry. I agree that when the zoning code comes back from the Coastal Commission that we need to take a look at accessory structures, be that libraries, whatever, just take a look at accessory structures and decide what they would be and what we're allowed to have in them for this exact reason. And again, this isn't the first time that I've had to really kind of move forward with something that I'm not happy about, but I know that it's the right decision. And so unfortunately, I'm not happy in having to say that I can't support a food distribution in a residential zone without there being the kind of safety and oversight that we need, but that I know that it's the right decision for this particular case.
Thank you. Jacques.
So I'd like to say a few things first about the process here. So I am a member of the Time Bank. I think Bonnie was going to check, make sure, but I dropped out because being a city council person, I put my membership on suspension. Being a city council person has been very time consuming, totally, which I enjoy, but I can't do both. So I checked a little bit about what a little free library is, and I'll get to that in a minute. Also want to say to the people who complained, there's at least one official complainer who I spent a considerable amount of time talking with, and others that I met when I was walking around the neighborhood, which I did. I walked around the neighborhood and talked to quite a few residents. I want to say to those people, that is a perfectly appropriate role to play in this society. You should not be ashamed of making a complaint. And on the other hand, I'd like to say to Bonnie, in this effort to provide a food pantry, that is a perfectly appropriate role to play in this society. To some extent, change happens in this society when we push the boundaries. And this is pushing the boundary. But it gets discussion going. It gets people thinking about what the issues of society are. So getting back to what a little free pantry is. So I went to the website, and it's interesting that the woman who started it had noticed a lot of little free libraries around. And with the rapid expansion of little free libraries, she started to say, gee, there's other uses for this kind of approach to get people to do things for their house and to make a statement about something they felt was important. And that's how the Little Free Pantry started. So it's about neighbors helping neighbors, which I think in general all of us agree with. So the main issue here is, how do you go about doing that? What is the most effective way within your capabilities of making that happen based on something you believe in? So these are food services, but there's one thing that really came up when I talked to neighbors. Even on the little library website, it talks about this option mediates the shame that accompanies when you go and ask for food. I know several people who hand out food to people. I'm at McDonald's or other places around town, and people, they want that, but they don't want to accept it because there's people there and they feel somewhat shameful about it. They shouldn't, because there's been many times many of us have been without food, and so I understand that. You still need to accept it. But on the website, it does talk about certain things that if you want to start up a library, you should do. This is right on the first page. Safety is one of them, which has been addressed in terms of the health. But the second point here is determine whether private property or public property best suits your vision. So what that's saying, should you do this on public property or private property? So you have to think of your neighbors. You have to think where the appropriate site is. It's not saying what you want to do is bad or good. It's just saying you have to act appropriately in the community that we all live in. You basically have to respect that community. You basically have to respect all your neighbors, whether they agree with what you're going to do or disagree. You still owe that to your neighbors. So follow appropriate channels to obtain permission. That means you go to the city planning in the city of Capitola. So in one sense, this is asking permission for after you've done it. A lot of us feel that that's an appropriate way to do things. You know, I go out and do it. If I am stopped or someone brings it up, there's a complaint, something like that, then we try to work through something to make it work. And I sort of have some support for that. The other thing I'd like to point out is I've worked in food. I was part of the food system in San Francisco, starting co-ops and stuff like that. I was very involved in that. And so I understand the need to provide food and to provide food to those who are needy. It's been something I did, how old am I? Almost 70. So it's 20 years, 50 years ago. It's a long time ago. But this effort, how effective is it? Is it something that really meets a need in a way that turns the angle of the basically what it's saying is that we live in a society where it's very hard for many people to survive, and food is one of the basic needs. But is this an effort that weighs out to put it in a neighborhood and affect neighbors around you, or should you do something different? Should you work in other organizations? And I got a really interesting letter, and the reason why I could read this is because I've been involved in food systems. It's someone who's a resident of Capitola, lives in the Jewel Box, wants to comment on this. And his approach is, I'm a longtime volunteer for homeless problems and other civic work, including work with Second Harvest, Food Kitchen, an agency in Palo Valley. And this person disagrees with the outreach for open-ended food attractions. So I've seen the benefits, well, but there also be problems. How do I put it? Okay. I don't believe this is going to attract the local neighborhood into a sense of community. And this is the part that I think I sort of picked up when I went around the neighborhood. There's some people who are pretty adamantly against this. These are immediate neighbors. And some people just said, you know, I really like this approach of a neighbor. And a lot of people said, I love the idea, but it's not the appropriate place. And so when you have this kind of discord within a block or 2 blocks of the actual location, that's where you're not being a good neighbor. You may be doing something good, but you're not being a good neighbor for the people that live next door to you, for the people that you see every day, for the people that, in one sense, are the ones that are going to watch your house when you're not there, and you'll do the same for them. In one sense, you might walk their dogs, you might do all sorts of things, but you're not being a good neighbor if you're causing this kind of discord. You may not see it. I've had people say, you know, I like what she's doing, but I don't want to say anything about it because of some of the negative things that they don't like about it. So I'm actually going to second Ed's motion.
That motion died and needs to be made again.
Okay.
So just a point of order, say what you need to say, and then after I speak, we'll see who wants to make a motion about what.
Okay. So I can't make a motion now, or are you going to?
You can make a motion now if you want.
Okay. So I'd like to make a motion to support staff's recommendation, but I'd like an addendum. I'd like to add to that motion that call this effort back for consideration in city planning to try to see if we could figure out something that would actually work. And I'll tell you why. Because I spent a considerable amount of time talking with Bonnie, and there was a give and take with how could we make this work? And I saw a willingness on her part to do something that might work. And so all I say is I would like that to be in recognition of the fact that you are a neighbor. You're a part of this community, and what you do affects them, and we have to keep that in mind.
Okay, Jacques, let me just try and coalesce what you said, because I didn't hear Ed's motion in there. I heard the alternate option by staff, which is planning should come back after doing some research with a rational solution to both libraries and pantries.
I like your wording.
That's what we're talking
That'll be
about.
my
So that
motion.
wasn't Ed's motion.
That's
It went in the other direction where we will try, if I understand it correctly, we will try and find a way to do this through the proper planning and research.
Yes, and this is what the little,
That's
what they
let's hold
want.
that. Okay, that's the motion.
Yes.
Is there a second to this motion? I will make a second to that motion for discussion. Okay. It's true this is a violation of the zoning code. And we can either maintain the zoning code, or if we see a violation, we can reconsider it and change the code. That's always an option available to us, and I think that's what the motion was talking about. Potential changes, whether it be these cupboards being in only commercial areas, certain regulations for library boxes on private property. There's a lot of different things we can do to keep the feeling alive.
Right.
To be honest, this is the result of a myriad of activities going on, all out of a good heart on Bonnie's property. There are a lot of activities that happen there. The sale of certain items, there's some plants, vegetables, the library box, the poetry box, and then finally the little cupboard. So there, we started to intensify the use more than it should have been. No one complained about this without prefacing, because I received many phone calls, without prefacing their complaint with understanding and appreciating the intent and the need for this kind of activity in our community. They all started the complaint with that. They said, we understand the thought behind it. We understand the heart behind it. We understand there are people who are hungry. We understand they need to be fed. It needs to be done in a different way, and maybe not on a busy corner in a residential neighborhood. Complex issue, we have to get a complex solution. Just a note, and what Kristen said, I really must say that to couple this idea of a community pantry with community crime is not valid. We cannot live and act out of fear, and that's basically what that is. That's being fearful of a problem that is valid and true, and connecting it with something that is not associated with it. I'm much more concerned with the speaker who spoke about a house that might be trafficking in drugs. That is a clear connection with potential crime, not someone going and picking up a can of corn out of a cupboard. Has nothing to do with it. So I seconded Jacques' motion because I think that while we shouldn't do a 90-day trial or anything like that, because we need to get down into the weeds, consider the code, bring it back through this body and the Planning Commission, and see how we want to change the zoning code so that, number one, libraries are a no-brainer. The little libraries are great. We see them all over town. We're not going to start a jihad about little libraries. That's just patently ridiculous. But we do need a better way to deal with the community food pantries, because they do not just feed people, they send an important message about human beings taking care of other human beings. Just their existence is important. If no one were ever to go in there and take a can of food, I feel better seeing that, because it means someone was caring about someone else. Plain and simple. If we keep it to just commercial areas, all well and good. If we find a way to put it on private property, I don't see that happening, but it could be a solution. But we can come up with a solution if we push a little bit and we work a little harder. So there's a motion and a second. I would like to get a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just make a few points for the council's consideration before you do vote. You made an interesting point right at the end about the commercial areas where it would be allowed. And under today's standards, if it was a church property, for instance, which can be in a residential district, but they operate with a CUP, if it's a commercial retail site or something, these uses could be permitted today. So there are areas of the city where we'd be open.
Well, that's good. Uses. So what we need to do is we need to task the Community Development Department to bring us back the things that can happen right now and some possibilities that could happen with a zoning amendment. But thank you very much for that. Yes, at churches, and you're saying like in the parking lot of McDonald's, there could be a community pantry.
One other hazard that's out there is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, food safety is regulated by the county. So we need them as a partner. If they come out and say, this is not something we're going to regulate, the city would be in a position of hiring a specialist to regulate food safety. Just keep that in the back of your mind.
And I've got that. I'm a food safety specialist personally, and no prepared food, no unpackaged food. I understand that the basic tenets of distributing food, just like Second Harvest, has certain requirements.
And then finally, in the interest of my successor, you can pile as much on her as you'd like as far as I'm concerned. But there are a number of priorities. She's short-staffed. There's going to be short of planner. Building, as you know, is just operating with consultant help. You've got a marijuana ordinance in front of them, which has to be put out immediately. It's got to get to the next planning commission meeting to meet that schedule. You have the high priority LCP amendment that has been initiated with Coastal Commission. So there's a number of things that are, you know, the council's going to have to consider priorities potentially.
Understood, and I think the fastest thing you can take off the plate is coming back with a report to us on all the permitted areas right now. So that would take no zoning regulations. That would be a great start. So I'd like to take a roll call vote.
Can you repeat the motion?
The motion is to direct staff to come back with possible solutions to writing into our code an amendment allowing libraries and little pantries, but before that, coming back with a list of places where they are allowed now, correct? And knowing where these can be set up, such as churches or commercial parking lots.
Can I make
What
a
does that do
comment?
to the status of the current?
It cannot happen until that comes back to us.
Good. Just make a comment, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just to maybe the relief of my fellow council persons, where I live, there's 2 churches and there's active food programs there. People come and go.
Right.
There's no complaints. A lot of people don't even know it's happening.
Again, we need to make this clear and transparent to the community, so all community members know, number one, what's allowed now and what may be considered at a future date. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Bertrand?
Aye.
Councilmember Peterson?
Aye.
Councilmember Bottorff?
No.
Mayor Termini?
Aye. Thank you all for participating, and I think we have some students in the. Do we have some students in the audience from SoCal High? You just watched a perfect example of government in action. Thank you very much. We'll go on to the next item.
I need to go to the bathroom.
Take a quick 5 minutes, please. Councilmember Bertrand has not left the building. We'll reconvene now with what I consider one of our more important items tonight, and that is a presentation of the Santa Cruz County Office of Education Threat Assessment Guide for school staff. Chief.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, and staff. I'm here before you tonight to give a brief presentation, a short presentation on the school campus threat assessment protocol recently adopted by the County Office of Education in conjunction with all of the law enforcement agencies in Santa Cruz County. And by way of a couple of introductions before I get going, my presentation will take about 5 minutes. But by way of a couple of introductions, I'd like to introduce the superintendent of the Soquel Unified School District, Scott Turnbull, is here tonight and is going to present some information when I conclude my presentation, as well as our principal up at New Brighton Middle School, Craig Broadhurst, also here tonight. And so I thank them for attending tonight to provide some information. By way of a little bit of history, you'll recall that in June of last year, the county grand jury published a report entitled Assessing the Threat of School Violence in Our Public Schools. One of the priority pieces of work from that grand jury report was the clear need and agreement by all of the agencies working in response to that report to create a threat assessment protocol that is used by law enforcement, all districts, and all schools within Santa Cruz County. And so that being the first goal coming from that grand jury report, a school safety partnership was formed shortly after the release of that report. And our first meeting was in September of 17. That school safety partnership was co-chaired by the County Office of Education as well as the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Department. And so we met once a month, unified personnel from the unified school districts in the county, administrative staff from all the schools, as well as command level personnel from each of the 6 law enforcement agencies in the county. With the top priority, as I mentioned, the creation of a countywide threat assessment protocol. In fact, that protocol was agreed upon and produced in December of 2017, with the eventual distribution throughout the school system in the county in March of 2018. So it was delivered to all of the districts and to all of the schools through their administrative staff. Now, I want to make it real clear that as a result of all of the work, my opinion, it was fabulous work that took place in a very short period of time, priority work. All law enforcement in the county are fully supportive of the established protocol and have committed law enforcement personnel as members of the school's threat assessment team. And I think that Scott are going to talk about that team composition on the campuses. But I will mention that the composition of that team are the principal, of course, or designee, psychiatric counselor or mental health counselor, perhaps both depending on the district or the school, a school counselor, and a law enforcement representative. For the Capitola Police Department, our representative who meets regularly with Craig is Sergeant Cliff Sloma. So I was going to ask the city manager to display the flow chart. He's already done that for us. And so at this moment, I would like to invite both Scott and Craig to the podium to talk specifically about this flow chart and the threat assessment protocol. Thank you very much. And then we'll all be available for questions at the conclusion of the presentation.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. As Chief said, I'm Scott Turnbull, Superintendent of Soquel School District. Just a quick preface about the threat assessment protocol. As Chief McManus said, it was a wide-ranging team, including County Office of Education, school district administrators from across the county, and local law enforcement represented. Produced a 28-page plan, the most important part of that plan being the threat assessment flowchart that you have in front of you. I think it was really important that the effort was led by school personnel, and we have to be ready. We have to be ready at our schools on how to respond to a threat, and then it was knowing when to bring in law enforcement. I think the other really important part of this is I just want to mention how much we appreciate the responsiveness of Capitola PD. You can have all the pretty flow charts in the world, all the documents in the world, but if you don't have a responsive police department, it really doesn't matter. And just for a quick example, last week I got a threatening email, and it turns out several other, every other superintendent in the county got it, and I believe some in Santa Clara County got it as well. And so I gave a quick call to Capitola PD and immediately got a response from Detective Sloma and Detective Evans, who came immediately on the spot out and kind of guided me through the process. And I think it even eventually got reported to the FBI. So again, I just want to reiterate that the real important part here is the responsiveness, and it's much appreciated in our school district. And so just a little bit about what I plan to do is go over in general a little bit about the flow chart and how it's used by our team members. And then kind of drill down to one really specific important part, and that is differentiating between a transient threat and a substantive threat, which is kind of the key point of this whole flow chart. And then I'm going to turn it over to Principal Broadhurst, who's kind of who will walk us through a hypothetical case study, so to speak, on how a threat may be handled during the busyness of a school day. So let's first look at the flow chart itself. I'm going to bring one here that I can see. And so you can see that it starts with a threat that's reported to the principal. As you can imagine, a principal's day is pretty busy. They literally make hundreds of decisions a day. And in the busyness of all this, it's nice to have something like this where a threat is brought to them. They have something concrete to fall back on. And so when a threat is brought to a principal on one of our school sites, the first thing is to kind of use common sense. If it's something serious enough to immediately contact law enforcement, they're given the free rein to do that. If it's something that's not immediately clear, then they go through this process. The first part of the process would be kind of to be an investigator, get all the details possible. Don't just react, but to get all the details possible. And then go down to step 2, which is, like I said before, decide whether this threat is transient or substantive. And I'll give a definition of those in just a minute. If the threat is not of the substantive nature, if it's deemed a transient threat, then the principal kind of kicks in, or the assistant principal, if it's at New Brighton, kicks into what is more traditional realm of a school administrator. Discipline, how does it have to be addressed? How do we make sure that if there was a student who was threatened, to make sure that they feel safe at school? This is their traditional realm, day-to-day activities for a school administrator. You can see that if it's deemed transient, it goes right down to step 7, which is to deal with it in the traditional manner that school administrators do. If it's deemed a substantive threat, then it goes into a decision-making process of even kind of drilling down even deeper. Is it a serious threat, or is it a very serious threat? You can see on each of those, administration knows, site staff knows, that's where you contact law enforcement and go through how this is going to be handled, how potential victims may be notified, whether students' parents are going to be notified, and how to address it from there. I'd like to give a definition of transient threats versus substantive threat, because again, this is the real telling point. In light of recent events, obviously, we're all kind of on edge a little bit and making sure that our students are safe. And so there's that real possibility of overreacting to every single thing, but the other opposite end of not reacting enough. So this is a really important part of the training. So a transient threat is defined like this: statements that do not express a lasting intent to harm someone. Transient threats are intended as either figures of speech or reflect feelings that dissipate in a short period. All transient threats end in an apology or explanation that makes it clear that the threat is over. The specific words of the threat are not as important as the context in which the threat is made. All threats that do not convey a sustained intent to harm someone are grouped together as transient threats. By definition, transient threats do not require protective action because there is no sustained intent to carry out the threat. That's a transient threat. Let me now define a substantive threat for you. These are statements that express a continuing intent to harm someone. They indicate a desire and raise concerns that someone is in danger of being harmed beyond the immediate incident. A threat not reacted or resolved should be considered substantive. So when we did our training, when this 28-page report by the Committee of Educators and Law Enforcement Agents was put together, that is one of the parts we really focused on when we brought it back to our school site administrators. And then our school site administrators then took it back to their school site teams, including teachers and counseling staff on hand so that everybody can have a clear vision of the difference between these two things and the protocol to follow. So with that kind of big picture presented and with the difference between a transient and substantive threat presented, I'm going to turn it over to Principal Broadhurst, who kind of walk us through what this might look like in a real situation.
All right, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members and staff. It's my pleasure to be the principal at Capitola New Brighton Middle School, but also a 14-year resident of the city of Capitola. And Mr. Turnbull gave a sort of an overview of the flow chart. And I'd just like to say that this has been a great asset that's come into play in the last few months. Many of the things that are in the flow chart were taking place, but this sort of codified it and helped us to have a more systematic approach to dealing with any kind of threat. And so what typically happens at the school site is we hear about something by other students who have heard something, and then they want to come and report something where a student might be in danger. We have a lot of great students and families at New Brighton Middle School, and so this will come to us. And so myself or the assistant principal will take notes and interview the student that comes to us with information, and then we'll follow up on that with an investigation of, we'll talk to witnesses who can perhaps corroborate what is being alleged, and then we'll also talk to the alleged perpetrator of the event. And it takes some time to get all the facts, but we'll go through it and sift through it and find out, is it a substantive threat? Is it a transitive threat? For the most part, the ones that we have dealt with are the transient threats. Either way, if we're in doubt, we will always notify Capitola PD, and I have to compliment Capitola PD. They've been such a great asset to us and very responsive in a timely manner. And they will, so if in doubt, we're going to contact Capitola PD, and they will send an officer or two to help us go through the process. If families need to be notified, we'll notify families. If consequences need to be meted out, we will hand those out too. And if needs be, there'll be a written plan that will follow up in terms of a behavior plan, which might include, let's say the threat was substantiated. There might be something written into a plan that requires student to seek counseling from our own staff or from outside staff. And having the threat assessment checklist is a great tool, because we can go through it and make sure that we are following all the procedures that we need to follow to assure that a threat is either being dealt with effectively. And it's quite comforting to have to be able to go through the checklist and make sure, have we done this? Yes. Have we done that? Yes. And it's been a great asset, and I'm glad that we have it. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take any questions, as would, I'm sure, Mr. Turnbull.
Jacques?
Yeah, I have a few questions. So I'd just like to point out that a lot of this rests on your ability to deal with students and the trust. And I'd just like to let you know that I was following behind you very recently. I think it was last week, and you came up to a couple of students and engaged with them in conversation. You knew their names, and they knew you, and they felt very comfortable talking with you. So that, to me, exhibits the basis for having that communication when things are received by a student, and I think that's great effectiveness in meeting that role. So thank you for carrying out that role effectively.
Thank you.
So that's what I observed. So I do have a question about when you ascertain whether it's an immediate or a substantive, or something that you could deal with in the regular way. How do you determine that this may be an indicator that the student may harbor something that could turn into a future threat, something that sort of clues you that there may be a psychological profile, if I could use that word, I'm not a professional, that sort of gives you an idea that this is someone to watch?
first, and then we can both comment on that. I think a cooling off period is one thing that really helps principals and school staff. Like any of us humans, sometimes we get a little hot-headed about something and maybe say something or say a threat that we regret.
Okay.
And if given a cooling off period, most of the time students will realize the error of their ways and say, I didn't really mean it. Oftentimes you can ask questions that maybe get to the point of, did you actually have a plan? You made this threat. Did you actually have a plan how to do that, how to pull that off? No, I was just mad. And so oftentimes that's a clear way to see if this was something that was said in the heat of the moment, or unfortunately, more infrequently, but it does happen, a student, even after a long cooling off period, or even a pattern over a period of days, will say, no, I meant it and I still plan to do it. That's obviously when you get into the realm of something more substantive. I don't know if you want to add anything, Craig.
No, I think the cooling off period is crucial, but we'd also look at a student's discipline record to see if there's a history, and we can go back, if they've been with us since kindergarten, we can go all the way back and look at discipline records from 6 years ago. We'll take that into account. We'll have our counselor talk to the student too, and get the opinion of the counselor as to if they feel like there is more of a serious nature to this threat, that the threats could be acted on. We'll look at their social media if we can have access to that, which sometimes we need to talk to parents and say, can we look at that? Sometimes we'll have access to social media because students have shared things out and other students have that social media record. And so we'll take things like that into account also. So students' history, how they're feeling sometime after the event, what our social worker may say, or our assistant principal. It's not just one person making the decision. We also have a school psychologist. And then is there a history of things that are concerning in their social media profile?
Okay, that actually was my next question. So my third question is the list, the checkoff list. Can you sort of explain the origin of that? I mean, is this a vetted list? Psychologists have developed this, police have developed this over time, and school officials have developed this over time, and it all fed into that. I just want to get a comfortable idea that this is, a very well-formed list.
Absolutely. The team that was brought together, just for an example, from my district included another district administrator, and that's our Director of Student Services. She's Dr. Lorena Brubaker, and she has a background, obviously, in psychology, and there were other members of the team from similar positions in the district and in the cooperating districts. And so yes, this was something that was vetted against research, and I think, I can't say in particular in this case, but I know that the American Psychological Association, I think that is the name of the group, often produces, or the Association of School Psychologists often produces information that is vetted in this way. So we had those representatives at the table who could look at it from that point of view.
Okay, great. One last question. Does restorative justice play a role when you deal with a student? Maybe they've been acting out and they haven't really quite self-reflected. They are students, they are young, they are growing. So is this something that is part of how you deal with the situations?
Yeah, I'd like to say that restorative justice is on the
Can you explain that? Maybe, I don't know if everyone understands it. I'd like to understand it from
the
your
idea
standpoint.
of restorative justice is if there is some harm or something's been broken, that we work to fix the harm or whatever was broken, whether that's a relationship or could be physical property too. The idea being that punishment alone isn't going to solve the issue. It might further alienate the offender. So we're trying to restore in a more sort of a social justice way to get the offender to realize the error of their ways and not make those wrong choices again. So I guess it's more of a if some students respond well, actually I would say most students don't respond well to punishment, but they do respond well to encouragement. And so restorative justice is I would say, a way of dealing with a situation that's going to not further alienate the student that you're concerned about.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm so glad. Well, there's more comments, I'm sure. I'm just very happy that you came here. I think the students, the young in our community are precious resources to each parent, to themselves, and to the future. And the fact that you're doing this is wonderful. Thank you.
Chuck. Anyone else have any questions? Thank you all. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you for the presentation.
Yes, great presentation.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on this report?
And thank you, Sandra, for coming too.
Seeing none, we'll move on with the agenda and go on with considering approval of the plan, specifications, and construction estimate for the Capitola Branch Library and authorize release of the documents for bidding purposes. Staff.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Excited to be here tonight to what will be your final look at the library plans and project until we start construction, and look forward to a grand opening coming up soon. So I'm going to kind of take us through the history of the project on the benefit of the public who may not know it, go through quite a few slides that show what the new library is going to look like, and then we'll talk about the current financing for it. So a little background here is in June 2016, Measure S, the countywide library measure passed, which provided $8 million for the Capitola Branch Library. That was kind of the emphasis to get the project going and get it built as quickly as we could. In July, then, we hired David Tanza with Bogart Construction as our project manager. He's overseeing the project on behalf of the city, the day-to-day dealing with the architects, and he'll also be doing the day-to-day construction management as we move into the next phase. David led the selection process for the architect, and in November we hired Nolan Tam as and their team as the project architect. And we also established at that time a design review committee made up of citizens and interested in parties from the library system to kind of on a monthly basis review where the design is and make design decisions. The city hosted 2 workshops in January and March of 2017, kind of to get the public's input on the initial design concepts. And then in March of 2017, the City Council approved the schematic designs. And those schematic designs are basically the plans we've gone forward with, providing more and more details with if we've gone forward with this. And I'm going to show you what we started with and where we are today. And it's amazing how far we were back in the schematic design. And then in November of 2017, the Planning Commission approved the design permits and certified the CEQA action necessary to entitle the project and allow us to move forward with construction. So at the first workshop, this was the site plan that was presented, showed just some general concepts of how the project could lay out. There was actually 3 options. This is the one that was selected through the workshops and the design committee, so this is the one I selected. Today, that site plan's looking like this with full landscaping and better details on it. These were the 3 kind of models we looked at back in then. The one on the lower left here was considered the outside deck. It was 2 flat roofs and just a pretty simple building. This one we called, the one on the lower right, was the butterfly building, as you can tell by the roof line there. And ultimately what was decided and moved forward with was what we called the marine version, which has what amounts to the underneath of a ship running through the ceiling here in an inverted V. We believe that gave it a unique character that we haven't seen in other library buildings. Today, this is the current graphics that are presented. You can see we've gone a long way in developing the plan itself, more and more details and landscaping. I'm going to kind of walk you around the building on the exterior. This is going from up on Clare Street, about 100 feet from Wharf Road, looking back toward. This is going to be the children's room here and the deck that connects the children's area with the tot lot that's there. This is the entrance of the library looking from the parking lot. Again, and this would be the community room, which is adjacent to the entrance and also ties into the children's room, so that that can be opened up and utilized when there's not a community meeting there. This is kind of just looking farther around. You can see the deck that ties in here that's going to be outside of the children's area. The floor plan hasn't changed a great deal. We've refined, the restrooms area and worked here in the staff area. In general, this is all staff area here. This is going to be the public restrooms. This is all essentially stacks and adult reading areas in here. These two rooms are going to be quiet study areas, and these are smaller study areas. This is the children's area and the community room up here. There's also a small conference room up here that's available. Looking at graphics of the interior, this is the front door here as you enter. So you can see this will be the community room, and the restrooms will be here, the meeting room and staff areas here. So this is looking back at the entrance. This is as you enter what you'll see. You can see the proposed signage kind of wraps around. So this will be the children's corridor as you go down to the children's area here. This will be the self-checkout area where patrons can check out books if they, or they can go to the desk. This is inside the children's room, and this is the art concept that we're including in the plan, is the development of these. The whole concept is these trees you can see in the back in this nook, and the trees outside, and these will continue as leaves that will be hanging from the ceiling. Looking at that nook at the end, we've been through several versions of this. This is I think this version most of us settled on. It's a seating area where kids can sit and kind of cozy in and read or write or whatever they want to do there. So that's something we saw in some of the other libraries that Noel and Tam had done, and something we wanted to continue in this project. So like I said, it's been through several iterations, and I think we're pretty happy with what it turned out there. Then this is looking back from the children's area back toward the front door. So the front door is over here. And this is the community room. This is where that wall can be opened as library staff deems necessary, and make this one larger space available for use, or it can be closed off. It can also be closed off at night and locked so that the community room can be used without accessing the children's room. This is in the main stacks and reading room. This is kind of from what I'll call the fireplace, which I'm going to turn around and look at this. So this is looking south toward Wharf Road. The library main desk will be here. The teen room, computer room, and studies will be there. Here's that checkout center. And then turning around about 180 degrees, this is the proposed library. This isn't the final look of this library. It's just the last graphic I had. It's actually going to be a much larger fireplace, and it will go through, be visible from both this side and from the meeting room on the other side. So it will be a see-through fireplace. Looking at, this is the teen study room that's going to be, and this is going to be the lounge that goes between the main reading room and the library. And I'll point out at this point that we can see this small graphic up here. This is the art from the Capitola bookstore that was at the King Shopping Center. We've saved that art. What? Bookshop Capitola, thank you. And that has been incorporated into the project in several locations. So moving forward, we look at the project cost. We went through quite a bit of discussion and settled on the approved budget here that was approved in January of 2017. So we had a $13 million budget at that time. Since that time, some of the costs have changed, obviously, and these are the updated costs. I'll just run through them, and then this is the difference in where we are today. So the project costs were originally about $9.7 million, and right now they're at $9.9 million, almost $10 million. They've gone up about $284,000. So those cost increases are mainly just the costs of doing business these days. The economy is doing well. There's lots of projects out there. Contractors and materials expenses have all gone up. We anticipated some of it. We tried to anticipate as much as we could when we approved the original budget. but where we are today is $284,000 over as projected. But we do think we can stay within our total inline budget at the bottom line. So our design and permit costs and project management costs have essentially stayed the same. They've gone down slightly, $2,000. And where we're proposing to make up the difference in construction costs is a reduction in the furniture, fixtures, and equipment budget, reducing that by almost $63,000. That is something that the library staff and the architects have worked together and looked at what furniture and equipment we need in the library, and they are the ones that recommended that reduction. So we've gone with it, and we believe that will not compromise any of the equipment or purchases that are made to furnish the library. And we're also recommending a reduction in the project contingencies from $954,000 to $730,000 to balance it. So at that point, we will have slightly under our budget. So the use of contingencies, I'll just talk about that. Certainly when we started this, we anticipated probably using the contingencies in the preliminary work as we were going through this, whether it be design changes in the building, unanticipated improvements that we had to make that we didn't run into, or just cost increases as we've seen due to the market. I think working with Dave Tanza, we are comfortable moving forward. We've gone from a 7.5% contingency on the total project budget to a 5.5% contingency. And I think we're quite comfortable moving forward with that. I think it's an appropriate allocation to make to reduce the contingencies at this point for the construction budget. Looking at the funding for the project, this is a slide we took from the mid-year budget when it was approved. We have $10.6 million from Measure S and the successor agency that have been designated and readily available. Council has made general fund transfers to the project of $1.5 million. The fundraising campaign has met their goal of $350,000, which was set out in the beginning. And other sources, mainly the Santa Cruz Library Fund and local funds, have added $262,000 to it. So that brings our total funding to $12.2 million, almost $12.3 million. At this point, we do, based on the current budget, have a funding gap of about $367,000. And as the discussion continues, I think the fundraising campaign may be able to help us close that gap. And certainly as we're looking at the budgets over the next 2 years, as this is being constructed, we're comfortable that budget allocations can be made to close that funding gap. So looking at the project schedule from today forward, obviously we're approving tonight the plans, getting authorization, go to bid and all that. We will have a pre-bid meeting with the general contractors on May 22nd, and the bids will be due on May 30th at 11 a.m. We anticipate getting good bids, and we anticipate coming to the June 14th City Council meeting to award the contract. If that all goes through, construction will begin in July of this year. Construction about a year and a half to complete, so we're looking at the somewhere in August of completing construction and the grand opening later that fall. So the city went through a series of pre-qualifications to identify the general contractors who can bid on the project. This is something, some cities do it regularly on a lot of projects. We did it because of the value of the contract in this. We requested their financial information from these and experience records from builders who submitted. All but one contractor that submitted was approved, and here's the list of people, of the generals that have been approved to bid on the contract. They can still select other subs, but we will only accept the bids from these 7 contractors as we move forward. So finally, our recommended actions tonight are to approve the plans, specifications, and construction estimate, authorize the Department of Public Works to release the documents for bidding, and to set the bid opening date for May 30th at 11 a.m. And that's my presentation.
Any questions, Council? Seeing none, I will open this up to the public. Anyone who would like to comment? Welcome, stranger.
Evening, Mayor Termini, Council, Treasurer Wilk, staff. I'm happy to be here representing the Capital Campaign Committee. We've been working really hard, and we are hitting it out of the ballpark. So I'm here to remind you of the MOU, the agreement that we made with the city, just to go over it so that you feel a little bit more comfortable tonight about a decision that you need to make. The Tier 1 goal that we agreed with you was to raise $350,000 to help build the library, with gross funding goal of $410,000 for campaign costs. This funding would be used to help build key components in the new library, like the fireplace, high quality furnishings, the children's wing upgrades, audio, video, visual screens in many of the rooms, and improvement to the community room. The Tier 2 goal, which we are now in, was to raise between $351,000 and $500,000, which will be used to help fund some extra enhancements like furnishings inside and out, computer upgrades in the children's wing, and improved opening day collection, as well as all of these funds go towards overall construction. So half of the Tier 2, excuse me, not all of these, but half of the Tier 2 funds go towards the construction. All of Tier 1 go towards the improvements. Then we go into Tier 3, which we have every reason to believe we will be in at some point, and that's $500,000 plus, which will be used to help establish an ongoing endowment for this library and help overall construction. So half will go to the library budget and half will go to the new endowment. So we've exceeded, as I mentioned, our Tier 1 goal. Even better, we don't feel that we're going to be using the full $60,000 in administrative costs that we originally budgeted. We knew we budgeted high, and we want to keep it under. So right now we're under half of that budget, and we don't anticipate going over too much more. We have some mailings and a few things to do, but not super costly. As of today, the pledges total, well,
Go all the way. Go ahead. You don't have to name names. Just go for the whole number.
Yeah.
Just
So
the
as
number.
of today, we are at around 600,000, right? So it's 575,000 in pledges. Subtracting out the 60,000, which that's the worst case scenario. That leaves, I can't do the math because we're raising money so fast. I got news of another $125,000 contribution just today. And so I can't do that math, but we're doing well, and no one seems to want to say no, and we're not done asking. I have two other large contributors that I'm preparing documents for right now that I have every reason to believe will contribute fairly large sums of money, and we haven't even gone out to the public yet. So we have a paver program that is called Paving the Way that will. I think a lot of people will want to buy a paver right by the front door. So I think you're safe in thinking that we're going to be okay with this. Any questions about it?
Thank you, Gail.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to address the council? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. Ed?
It's a beautiful, gorgeous library, and I want to thank everybody that has come up with the design and what it looks like. And I cannot go without acknowledging the committee and the hard work. It's, definitely the numbers that you're forecasting right now far exceeded what you started, or which, I don't know, was a guarantee, but the estimate was low at $350,000. The numbers do continue to rise as, I applaud your enthusiasm. I applaud the Public Works Director with him being comfortable that we're going to have enough money to build the library. I'm just unfortunately that guy that is concerned about realistic costs. We don't have any bids back from this building from the 7 people. The nature of what the Public Works Director conveyed to us, people are busy right now. There's a lot of work. There's not really a lot of hungry contractors out there looking for work. And there's some features in the library that are going to cost extra money. And I applaud the fact that we have almost $1 million in contingency, but right now, prior to setting out for bids, we reduced that by 25%. And that's a fact. So I'm looking at, as we're increasing numbers on some fundraising, we're also starting to dip into our contingency, and the fact that the city's already $2 million over budget on this library, which is whittled down to $367,000, I'm still concerned. I'm not comfortable. I can acknowledge this great fundraising. It's a miraculous effort by all the people involved, and I applaud the enthusiasm. But I'm very skeptical. We have 2 years to go before this thing will be done. We don't even have a construction bid yet, and there's not a job. I was involved with the building of the Judy K. Souza Metro bus station that ran considerably over budget. It's just there are buildings out there that are being built, and this is a reality. And so I just want to be that foot on the ground that says, let's just cautiously proceed. I will continue to support and encourage people to donate to the library and become contributors. But I'm still not comfortable with the commitment of the city, and I hope that when this building has its grand opening, that there's $1 left in that contingency fund.
Kristen?
I'm excited. I've always been in support of the library and the plans, the specifications. The people, the fundraising committee, they might as well start a bank. They're a bunch of rock stars. They're doing a fantastic job. So I'm really excited about this, and I will make a motion to approve the recommended actions.
Second.
Jacques, comments?
Yes, I do have a comment. I have a question if the mayor's okay with this.
Sure.
Okay.
Go to questions now.
Okay. I should have thought of it earlier, but I didn't because of Ed's comments. And Ed brought up the issue of we don't have a bid yet, and it hasn't gone out to bid, obviously, as you said. My question is this: the fact that this is a library and it has such a high-profile part of this community, is that going to be significant when we actually go out to bid? Is that going to help, with the bidding process, how easily basically, is that going to help us in any way instead of some run-of-the-mill building?
I think to a certain extent, yeah. I think there's businesses or contractors would like to have their name on a major civic building in the city of Capitola. So to what extent I can't answer, but yes, I do think it is a benefit, and I think that's the interest we got when we did the pre-qualifications, that there was enough interest in this. 7 contractors pre-qualified is a good number at this point. So.
Okay, that's significant, 7. I thought that was really interesting. So the reason why I asked this question is sort of offsets some of the concerns that Ed brought up, which I think are reasonable. And we have to recognize the city of Capitola has put ourselves in a position, but I think based on the capital campaign and the response of the committees, the various committees, there's many that are putting into this, I think it's a good indication of how important this building is to Capitola, how important it is going to be for the future of Capitola, and for the children that are going to use it and all the others that are going to use it. So that's why I second this, and thank you, Kristen, for making the motion.
I have nothing to say. And we'll never know, Ed, how much it costs until we approve this and put it out to bid. So, roll call, please.
Councilmember Bertrand.
Aye.
Councilmember Peterson.
Aye.
Councilmember Bottorff.
No.
And Mayor Termini.
Aye. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Move on to the next item. Consider a community survey with Gene Bregman and Associates regarding the November election. Staff.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as you will recall, earlier this month we talked about a local cannabis regulatory structure, which included changes to the zoning code, a new cannabis licensing ordinance, as well as a potential cannabis tax. At that same meeting, we talked about going back and getting a proposal for a polling contract in advance of the November election to better get an opinion, a gauge of where citizens were at if we were to put something on the ballot. The treasurer also indicated an interest in maybe obtaining some polling information regarding shifting the treasurer position from elected to appointed. As directed, I've obtained a contract from Gene Bregman and Associates. He's done a number of polls for us in the last couple of years. The contract amount is not to exceed $13,000 and would be a survey of approximately 175 likely voters. The reason for the not to exceed amount is simply that it depends on how long the survey takes, which depends on how many questions we're asking each individual. I thought it was good. As I started thinking and talking to Gene about the polling contract, I went back and pulled up the last time we did a contract, which was in 2014, and note that we pulled the question of the elected versus appointed treasurer then, and I have the results up on the screen where you can see the before info is simply when people were asked cold, would you support changing the elected treasurer from elected to appointed? The answer was 33% in favor, 40% against, and then after info is after arguments both in favor and against are read. One of the thoughts that has occurred to me that is well, and so then in addition we also pulled the TOT and a 1% increase of TOT, and that was 74% in favor and 19% against. In terms of the timelines, the final date to submit something for the ballots would be August 10th. We have council hearings in June and July, one hearing in July where I think we would need to focus on determining what, if anything, we would want to put on the ballot. So if we want to have polling data for June, we would need to move it forward tonight. Now, in looking at those results from the prior poll, I think a couple thoughts I wanted to share with the council. One is if we're focused on a single general use cannabis tax, I'm not necessarily sure that polling is necessary for a couple of reasons. One is Prop 64 passed with a large plurality of support in our community, the region as a whole. In addition, if this is a referendum, really a question we're asking the voters is, do you want to allow a cannabis regulatory structure in Capitola? I don't know that the polling is necessarily going to be determinative of whether or not we do this. The treasurer issue, I'm not sure that opinions have probably changed much since 2014, and my suspicion is that it's essentially a coin flip, and it really comes down to whether or not there's going to be strong leadership to campaign for it. If it's something that the council feels is important, treasurer feels is important, would there be people out there arguing why it's important? I will note that to switch our clerk from an elected clerk to an appointed clerk, it took 3 times. And it took our appointed clerk at the time 3 elections, going door to door literally to get it done. So I think that's something to weigh, is whether or not those results would have changed since 2014. TOT, I think if that question were to be asked, and my suspicion is it would poll well, but I think as we learned in 2014, it's highly dependent on industry support. You can get great poll results, but if you have mounted opposition, it can be difficult to pass something. So my recommendation tonight is that I think the polling is the most valuable for the city if we're going to be considering multiple tax options and or special revenue items. If you're going to keep it simple and we're going to focus on just maybe a general cannabis tax and or the treasurer, I'm not sure the polling adds a lot to the debate, and we may be able to save our resources. But if we are talking about the interplay between a TOT, a 66% cannabis measure, I think then polling results could be helpful. I hope that's not too confusing, and I'm available if you have any questions.
Any questions? Anyone in the audience like to address the council? Then we'll bring it back and we'll start with Jacques.
I think the ultimate polling is what's on the ballot, quite frankly.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Ultimate polling is what's on the ballot. So
ultimate polling?
Polling, yes. I mean,
is what we're considering.
Yes, right. No, I mean, basically when the populace votes, that's what I'm saying. That's the ultimate polling.
Okay.
You got what I'm saying.
I got what
So, if it does come to, an increase in tax, is it going to be worth the campaign? So I could see where that might be a good idea. So we haven't done that discussion yet. In terms of the city treasurer, I think we're a little bit of ways from making that decision in terms of a campaign or putting something out there. I would like to say to the public, I did have some discussion with Peter a couple of nights ago, or last night, I think. And so I think there's some room for discussion there, but I don't think we're ready for something that would be put on a poll to actually ask the public, because I don't think I'm not comfortable right now with what I've heard. I think we need to have some discussion with what would be actually put forward before the city population.
Ed,
just to be clear, if you want polling data back and sort of in the timeline for your decision-making process, tonight would be the night to kick it off. If we don't need polling,
I agree, and I'm not ready for that.
okay, that's fine.
So,
Yeah.
I was wondering if I could add some information.
Well, sure. Jump right in here.
So, regarding the treasure polling, so I read the description of the 2014 poll, and one of the things that Jamie pointed out was that there wasn't much of a difference when the question was first asked as opposed to later when it was re-asked after the arguments had been presented. But what I noticed is that the argument that convinced me wasn't even presented, and that is the dangerous conflict between the finance director and the treasurer, which both have the exact same charter. And that can cause a lot of trouble. And that is not an argument that I didn't think was sufficiently presented. It was just presented more like, oh yeah, it's a redundancy. Well, it's not a redundancy, it's a conflict, and it's a potentially dangerous conflict. And I think if that was presented, perhaps in the poll, or even at the final poll, as you pointed out, Jacques, that might make a difference. So, just for your information, that information wasn't there.
Thank you. Thank you. Jock to Ed.
Third time's the charm.
Yes.
With regard to the question about to poll or not to poll, because that's what we're going to discuss right now, and I tend to agree with the city manager, especially since placing these items on the ballot is going to cost money. Individually speaking, with regard to the TOT tax, even last time, the numbers overwhelmingly said that it was going to win, and it was because of opposition. So the polling, it was not about what I feel the consensus of citizens of Capitola is. So I believe that the polling isn't necessary for TOT. With regard to the treasurer, even if there is some language, that is going to be, again, who comes out for or against that specific issue. So to pay for polling and to get a 51-49 answer doesn't really give us any concrete information. And with regard to the marijuana initiative, my only, I was an advocate of not having dispensaries, and so I was lobbying for that polling for that purpose. But I think that if the intent is to establish a tax and to actually have dispensaries, we should be careful about making sure that remains a 50% item and not put any restrictions on what the money can do. This council can agree philosophically on what it wants to do with any of the issues. But when I did look at the research for the polling on how Prop 64 passed, all the precincts were in the low to mid 60s. So there is favor for that. I don't think there's not going to be any kind of a revelation that it's going to pass. So I would say we should save the $13,000, and I'm going to make a motion not to do any polling at this time.
Second.
Kristen?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Bertrand.
Bertrand.
Thank you very much.
I'm not opposed to throwing out the polling to save the money, but I am curious as we move forward if we do so. I am still interested in the idea of the dedicated children's fund. So if we get rid of the polling idea right now, that is still something that's on the table to discuss in future consideration, correct? Just because we're not polling on it doesn't mean that we're not ever going to discuss it again?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Peterson, you're right. You're not closing the door on that discussion. My suggestion is if we are talking about a 66% measure, the value of polling does increase then, because I think then the question becomes do you break it up into two? Do you have a 7% general and then a 1% dedicated, or is it better to have them lumped together? So there's some questions that I think polling could help you with if you are contemplating the 66% measure. I would note that the City of Santa Cruz implemented this similarly with a 1% sort of through a statement of intent and a resolution that the council passed establishing the Children's Fund.
Sure. Is it possible to put them on the ballot separately so that the passage of the dedicated Children's Fund doesn't potentially hinder the passage of the...
So that's what I was alluding to, the
right.
notion of a 7% and a 1% separate taxes. It is, but this is where I think polling could help, because I would hate to advise you that was the best way to go and then see them both fail, because people were choosing one over the other, where maybe if they were together they would pass with 66%. So my suggestion is if you'd like to do the 66% as a council, or you want to put that on the table, that we would kind of poll and test some of those different ideas. So no, this is not your ultimate decision point, but if we were leaning in that direction, my suggestion would be to let's get a little bit of data before we make the final decision.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that it's not the final decision point and that it's, doesn't necessarily slam the door on that, but I also agree that it's got to be worth it to do the polling, and just for one question, I'm not sure that it is.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I missed a meeting. I'm not up to speed on what Councilperson Christine brought up in terms of the Children's Fund.
Yeah, you missed the previous meeting. There's a movement afoot to make this tax 1% of the cannabis tax dedicated to early childhood education, which would cause it to be a 2/3 passage.
Okay, I certainly like the idea of that, but it means the 2/3.
And that was the discussion I was just asking the city manager about, was if we put it on the ballot as two separate items, one, do we agree to have a cannabis tax, and two, do we agree to put 1% of that cannabis tax to a dedicated fund? That wouldn't necessarily require a 2/3 vote, correct? Because it would be two separate issues. And so it would need a 50% vote for the cannabis tax and a 50% vote for the dedicated fund, correct?
No. It would need
50%.
50% for cannabis tax and 2/3.
Okay, that's right, fine. But it doesn't raise the threshold for approval of the cannabis tax in general, correct? Okay.
Okay, so, okay. And so what did you mean when we're not at that decision point? So we still have a couple of weeks or a month to get the ballot measure, the actual survey done? Is that what you're saying?
No. So to go back,
I just want to understand the timeline.
The council needs to make a decision on what it's going to put on the ballot by August 10th. And so
August
we have
10th.
a couple of meetings between now and then. We have one in July and several in June. So essentially now is the time, if you want to have poll data in front of you as you're making that decision, now would be the time to move forward with polling. And so the question comes down to if we can, I'll put it like this. My recommendation is that if it's a 50% cannabis tax and we can agree that we do an 8% not to exceed amount, and we would use a statement of intent to establish the children's fund, my recommendation would be not to poll.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about a 1% that's subject to a 66% vote, my suggestion would be to poll that, and then we would want to test about breaking it up into two or
Right.
keeping it together into one. So that's my recommendation. And so while it's not your final decision point, if you want to have the polling data in front of you, now is the time to make that decision.
Okay, so if the cannabis is passed, City Council could actually assign 1% later to Children's Fund.
So for example, what the city of Santa Cruz did is they passed a not to exceed 10% cannabis tax, and then they set their cannabis tax as a council by ordinance at 7% underneath their not to exceed 10% amount. It's a general tax. It was passed by more than 50, well, I don't know what the vote is, but
Doesn't matter.
way more
Okay.
than 50% of the voters. Subsequent to that, this last year, they raised it from 7% to 8%. And in doing so, said it's our intent to use that 1% to put into this children's fund. And they passed a resolution and they established a children's funds with dedicated uses for it.
Okay.
So they passed a 50% measure and they set this up later through a statement of intent.
Okay, so we can do it. But we need
One way or the other.
one way or the other,
One way or
right?
the other.
Okay, thank you.
We could save $13,000.
So I believe there's a motion not to poll,
Motion, it was just a simple motion not to poll.
and the items that we put on the ballot will become at a later date.
Yes.
Perfect. Roll call.
Councilmember Bertrand.
Aye.
Councilmember Peterson.
Aye.
Councilmember Bottorff.
Aye.
Mayor Termini.
Aye.
Unanimous.
And to conclude that you're not in favor of going for Tito T at this time?
Polling? No, the polling isn't the
No, on the ballot.
Am I in favor of putting it on the ballot? Absolutely.
Okay, just want to check.
But I'm doing some background on that at this time.
Background, are you? Okay, good.
I don't want a repeat of our past history.
Let's hope not.
Ooh.
And thank you for taking so long to drop the other shoe in the library discussion. You were very crafty with that. And I don't think we have anything else unless the city manager wants to
Keep us here.
throttle or shoot any councilor for any particular comments tonight. And he's pursing his lips very tightly. Mr. Treasurer, did we do a good job?
I want to thank PG&E for
Excellent.
giving us lights for tonight because it would have been.
Or we would have been home at 7:30. Thank you, PG&E. Meeting's adjourned. Thanks for.